Welcome, everyone. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Um, my name is Anat. I'm head of academic partnerships at Menti-O. I'm also an adjunct professor for about 15 years, and I'm really excited to be here today and invite you to listen to our wonderful guest today, Mr. Rob Ditto, from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. And I'll say a bit more about Rob in a few minutes. I think the interesting part about today's webinar is the fact that we got Rob to agree to talk to us and share his knowledge, and B, the fact that we will be incorporating information from both perspectives, one of the instructor and the other weighing more heavily from the IT perspective of adopting new tools, especially in these challenging and demanding times, really. Just to kind of set the stage, I'll mention that we also have Menti-O staff team here on the webinar, and you're seeing Tzvika here. Say hi if you can. Thank you. He'll be moderating the Q&A part and also answering your questions on chat and Q&A during the webinar itself. So please feel free to write questions while myself and Rob are speaking on the webinar. We'll be focused on speaking to you, whereas the Menti-O team will be gladly answering your questions or collecting them towards the Q&A session for later on. I think that the last thing I'll say before I'll jump right in is to kind of design or outline the agenda for today. So I'll start by taking a few minutes to tell you about Menti-O and what it is. And then I'll introduce Rob and give the floor to you in order to discuss the topic that gathered us all here, which is choosing the right EdTech tools for 2021, these challenging times. Then Rob will present many interesting aspects of how do we choose the right tools. And from there, I'll add a few remarks. Then we'll go to Q&A, questions that we'll be collecting from you guys, and some final remarks, and the hour will be over way too quickly. So I'll jump right in to start kind of setting the floor of what this is about. So as I mentioned, I'm an instructor, an adjunct professor, and also head of academic partnerships at Menti-O. Menti-O is what you might call next generation discussion board that highlights engagement, collaboration, and assessment or evaluation by the AI, the platform itself. And if I'll really briefly kind of tune you into what we do, I'll share this with you to say that these are, sorry, I am not sharing. Now I'm sharing. Sorry, these are, after using Zoom for so long, I'm surprised that I made that mistake, but hoping that you'll forgive me. So now you're seeing my screen, right? Okay. So the challenges that we're all facing is first and foremost the fact that discussion boards can be very demanding, both on us, the instructors, in responding to them, and for the students to engage in. In addition, students are hardly collaborating. They're not in the classroom, they're not in cafeteria, they're not in the campus, hardly in campus. And so it's difficult for them to collaborate and make sure that their voices are being heard. And last but not least, it's really difficult to assess their contributions and how they are actually studying. And so Menti-O in this respect is extremely helpful, because what it does, it helps the students express their voice, collaborate, and improve their skills, empower them basically to understand the analytics and improve their behavior on the platform. And I think the main reasons why Ment.io is extremely helpful for instructors is the fact that students love it because it feels to them very social media-like in the interface. It engages them and they receive constant feedback, and it enables evaluation that is very objective. They understand it very clearly, how they're being evaluated for their participation in the different discussions. Lastly, I'll just really briefly show you what it's about. And I'll start by, and this is just 3 screens that I'll show so you'll get the picture. This is a screen with a few sample discussions on Ment.io. If you go into the discussion, what you're seeing is how it is organized, including some analytics, how it is organized according to the quality or agreement towards particular answers. And you can see very clearly agreements and disagreements, highlighting collaboration between the students. And lastly, I'll just mention that students can see team analytics, they can view their own analytics and see how to improve. And us, the instructors, can see the assessment of each student according to different components. And so that is the very brief introduction to what Ment.io is about. As you can see, it is a discussion board, but an extremely sophisticated one in the sense that it offers a lot of value, and yet it is very simple to use, which is a topic that I think is really interesting and I think Rob will touch upon. And now I'm getting to the most interesting part of today. I'm really happy to have, really privileged to be able to introduce Rob. Thank you so much for being here. Rob is the technical director for learning technology and instructional design at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. After 9 years of managing content delivery technology for several interactive media firms, Rob went back to school in 1997, helping Wharton launch its award-winning web cafe service, supporting faculty teaching and student collaboration. In 2010, Rob began discussions with instructors on piloting a very interesting tool, Canvas LMS at Wharton, as the product was being launched. He now helps to run the business school advisory board for Canvas. And more recently, Rob is redesigning his team to have positions clearly focused on instructional design and technology. Rob holds a Bachelor of Science in Economics from the University of Pennsylvania. And I can attest that he is a wonderful leader to adopt new innovative tools. And thank you so much for being here. And I'm turning the floor to you.
Well, thank you so much, Anat, for that kind introduction. Need a sip of water here before I get started. Excuse me, very much appreciated. All right, I'm going to start sharing my slides. Is everybody seeing that all right?
Yeah, it looks good. And now I think you're going to presentation mode. Maybe give it another try. Yes, exactly.
There we go.
Yes. Now it's giving us we're also seeing the next slide prepared. I don't know.
Oh, okay. I'm sharing the wrong screen then. Let me fix that. Thank you for pointing that out.
Sure.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. So I appreciate the introduction once again, Anat, and I wanted to acknowledge the very diverse audience that we have, faculty and course instructors from elementary and secondary education, as well as higher education, and some information technology staff. I see some instructional designers and technologists out there. I think we have some university administrators. Not sure if we have any procurement professionals, but those are good people to get to know, as I'll be discussing. And even some students. Thank you very much for all of your interest. As Anat and Tzvika mentioned earlier, everybody's encouraged to use the chat to talk to each other and to send questions. I may not be able to read and respond to what's in chat while I'm talking, but we have some of the other folks on the webinar doing that. But even so, you're encouraged to write questions in the Q&A or share comments via meeting chat. Thanks, Anat, for the introduction to Menti-O. And I see it as an AI-enabled discussion tool which can fit into an EdTech ecosystem, such as the one that I help curate at the Wharton School, which is the business school at the University of Pennsylvania. So today's reality gives us an opportunity to search for what fits in our ecosystem, what shows up differently under the new normal, under current circumstances. I've always sought to fine tune and innovate with what we offer at Wharton and Penn. And that search leads me to sort of three types of sources out on the web, as well as advice from companies and partners. And I'll talk a little bit now about my thinking in that regard. Some of the key publications that I follow include EdSurge and Campus Technology, as well as the Chronicle of Higher Education. I'm in the United States, so obviously some of what I have to say here has a bias towards that. In addition to EDUCAUSE Review, which is the journal of EDUCAUSE, the IT for Education organization that's very prominent here in the States. I'm aware of similar efforts that sometimes consult those as well. ERAI is, for example, the Journal of UNIS, which is a European higher ed education professionals organization. In some ways, you can think of UNIS as the EDUCAUSE of Europe. I also mentioned some industry analysts here. I didn't cite any firms, but there are certainly analyst firms that follow education technology. Gartner Group, who, full disclosure, University of Pennsylvania is a customer of, has some EdTech analysts who are great. Others of you may be familiar with, I took a note so I make sure that I say their name correctly. Whorton IQ is a dedicated international analyst firm focused on education and education technology. And I've had the good fortune to see them present at a conference that our school co-sponsors called Reimagine Education last year. I'd say my two key that I follow that I wanted to sort of mention before we get into our story here. eLiterate is the analyst blog where I first learned of the Canvas LMS, which, as Anat said, we had a platform before Canvas, and then Canvas replaced it. And Michael Feldman is the brains behind eLiterate. His close colleague, Phil Hill, has Phil on EdTech, which is in the recent years become a little bit more focused on adoption news, comings and goings, industry trends, and they're both very much worth, regular read or RSS subscription. And through all of these sources, you can learn about emerging tools and categories of tools. Another source for finding tools like Ment.io, which can become part of what I call the ecosystem for online teaching and learning at your institution, and how online supplements face-to-face teaching and learning when we return back to the next normal for safe face-to-face. Would be catalogs of teaching tools that are out there. There are a lot of these, and they start from different approaches. The major learning management system platforms are, for those of you outside the US, what's often called the VLE, or virtual learning environment. The major vendors each have, and my apologies if I left out your supplier, each have their own either partner program or sort of app store that interoperates with that particular system. And those are valuable sources of, hey, I'm not hearing about this in the press, but hey, it just showed up in the instruction partners list. Similarly, IT vendors have very much responded to the shift to remote instruction that's necessary in 2020 with a variety of offerings, some based on their education suites like Google Classroom, others more on the collaboration suites that are often the backbone of a university or school experience. I'm talking about here Office 365 or Google Apps for Education. And this year, Zoom is in many of your daily lives, including right now during this webinar. What I've been struck by is how one of their partner programs called ZAPS is beginning to enable education solutions. So that's both worth following and also something to question in the sense of can a vendor recommended tool lock you in to a solution? That's by no means the only intent of a partner program or a catalog of tools coming from a vendor. But it's still a consideration. So I incorporated in my thinking standards for educational technology, and I am part of a standards organization called IMS Global. The Wharton School became a contributing member. It's something that happened after I had the good fortune to speak at their annual conference a few years ago. IMS Global, along with Instructure, the vendor for Canvas, were the key organizations that led to a source that I think many of you on the call have heard of before, EduApp Center, where any teaching tool or educational platform that supports the LTI or Learning Tools Interoperability Standard has the opportunity to list themselves there. The same standards organization that I have been talking about is the shepherd of not just LTI or Learning Tools Interoperability, but other things that you may be familiar with, like Common Cartridge, which a simple explanation of that is a form of zip file that wraps up teaching content, or QTI, that's standard for quiz, test, exam, assessment questions. They have, IMS has a directory of certified tools. So where EduApp Center talks more about the, just here are tools that are plug and play with any LMS, the certified tools participate with IMS to the extent of being certified on their capabilities and their adherence to the standards. And when I say don't forget app stores, I am always struck when I visit places like the Apple App Store or Google Play Store, how there are popular players supporting education, such as student note-taking tools that have millions of adopters, and it sometimes surprises me that some of these popular apps aren't always necessarily in my focus with my way of thinking. So I remind myself not to forgive them. I wanted to pass that on. So this is a dizzying source of inputs. How does one sort of make sense of it all? Maybe figure out a model for identifying tools and reviewing them, evaluating them. I don't profess to have all the answers for that. Today, I'll give you sort of my sort of seat of the pants methodology, what to think about on the coming slides. But before I do that, I wanted to share some links. We'll make these slides available, of course, after the presentation to a more formal model for tool identification that is from EDUCAUSE. I believe it was in EDUCAUSE review. And the institution contributing to that article has actually made, in Canada, made their evaluation rubric a piece of Creative Commons content. So that's something that you can use and adapt, edit, remix to your heart's content. So I think of all of these sources as full of possibility, opportunities for serendipity, but they don't replace the need for focusing on what are your wants, what are your colleagues' needs and aspirations, and most of all, what are the conversations that you can have within your institution, that you can have with potential suppliers. I treasure my first conversation with some of the folks on this call, like Anat, and start the needed conversation. So a few times during this talk, I'll be giving some suggestions for conversations you can start on a particular topic. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. If there's any pressing questions, feel free to interrupt me now. So when a tool shows up as promising, take the opportunity to identify and where needed to stimulate faculty participation. In the case of Menti-O, I got lucky. The gentleman whose face you see higher up on the slide, Gadalan, is somebody who's recommended teaching tools for me in the past and made sure to bring Menti-O to my attention. Shortly after that, I learned that not only Gad, but also his colleague here at Wharton, Ken Moon, had managed to adopt Menti-O informally with students, just simply creating accounts and logging in. A point I'll be returning to that some of you had questions about prior to the webinar, which thank you for that. I appreciate that. So, of course, I reached out to these terrific folks, learned about their score that's at the heart of their analytics method for analyzing the discussion posts in a MENT team. You can think of a team as a discussion board, and different qualities. I think what was really sort of a catalyst for my consideration of, hey, this is potentially pilot worthy, is a piece of communication that explained how that scoring model could inform the grading of class participation. Something that, at least in business and professional education, can be a very important component of a grade. It can be a very high percentage of a grading criteria. That is. Faculty have said to me over the years, we're always looking for ways to do that more thoroughly, but also more productively. And when that application note from one of the MENT colleagues came to me, that got the wheels for me. So to send this, in the direction of a pilot, another angle that I feel is important is deliverability. What degree of, what you might call plug and play is available, or stated a different way, how can launching the tool and using it be as frictionless as possible in a teaching setting? I mentioned LTI, or learning tools interoperability, before, and that it's one of a set of standards that can make digital transformation in higher education easier. The gap to fill before pilot for me was for Menti-O to suggest to them that they consider supporting these standards. And there was I've got a little positioning issue here that I want to correct so you can see my word. All right. Hopefully we're back to the full size of the slide now. My apologies for that. Since they were already targeting education as something that Menti-O could enhance, I suggested to them to take the opportunity to use the newer and more future-proof form of the Learning Tools Interoperability Standard, known as LTI Advantage. And there's one of the many hats that I wear is, as something of a developer evangelist, both for internal developers, which we do have at Wharton, some of whom even build teaching tools, as well as our suppliers. Through my participation in IMS, I have gotten to where I can make some suggestions about focus on this part of the standard first, do these things later, use these technical resources, et cetera. So that's a thing that I did in service of filling a gap. I think that one of the attendees had a question about reducing logins or making it easier on students not to have to keep track of a login to this teaching tool versus a login for the LMS. And LTI Advantage, its capability known as Launch, is exactly about that, a limited form of single sign-on that knows that you're logged in to a course on the learning management system or VLE learning platform, and sends a secure message to the tool saying, this is who that person is, here's the information that the configurer of the LTI tool has allowed to be made available to my tool under institutional and other guidelines. The thinking behind that is something I'll talk about in an upcoming slide.
Rob, hi, this is Tzvika. I'm just here as the moderator of time. I know there's probably a lot of things here to address, knowing the questions that came from the audience.
Sure,
and
sure.
I do want us to maybe finish the first part of your talk in about 6 or 7 minutes. And
I know appreciate
that
the guideline. Thank you.
Yeah, you wanted to talk about accessibility and single sign-on and many things. So maybe just to make a quick stop, maybe for the benefit of the audience who are listening to us, we're going to shoot your way now a very short poll with 3 or 4 questions just to hear about the challenges that you feel about selecting EdTech tools. So we will submit it right away, and you're supposed to see that on the screen. So take a minute and try to address this survey. And when you finish, Rob will continue maybe to 2 or 3 more selected slides just with the high-level ideas around the things we touched. So we'll have enough time for the Q&A. I know that there's many questions that some of you have sent in advance, and we want them to shoot them at Rob and Anat. So we're excited for that. And we'll try to finish that part of the session in about 6 or 7 minutes and go to the Q&A and other stuff. So thank you for taking part of the survey, and we are proceeding in a few seconds.
Thank you very much.
You can go ahead, Rob.
All right, great. So as I was saying, other factors were already supported to a degree in our pilot consideration. Some of these are around intending an equitable access for learners. I believe there was at least one question from pre-webinar from the attendees about accessibility. So my advice on that is that many teaching tools that support LTI Advantage are fundamentally web applications. And so by adapting the WCAG or WCAG standard, which is internationally utilized, they can leverage a really mature body of knowledge. But the applicability of that standard to ensuring accessibility can really vary depending on the tool. I won't show this link for time reasons, but if you get my slides afterwards, follow it to sort of see a diagram from IMS on sort of how applicability shows up at different layers for accessibility standards. I haven't really thought in depth, for example, about how Zoom, the Zoom client, how it supports accessibility, but I'm sure there's an interesting story there. Budget is, of course, a factor. Many tool providers have made their tools free during this pandemic, others with substantial discounts or evaluation opportunities. Free is always good, but you may have to weigh what leverage you have with a free engagement versus a paid engagement related to some of the security or privacy factors that I'll be touching on in just a moment. Sometimes the intention of considering adding to your ecosystem is around broadening general capabilities rather than experimenting with a specific tool. And so sometimes rather than we want to try a different take on a discussion board. The tool I might be looking for when I'm shopping is something more pervasive. Like, what if every course in our learning platform had a search engine and one that could search information in federated tools? And so it's sometimes functionality that is making learning more accessible. IT security is, of course, extremely important. Many universities have chief information security officers. School districts may as well. At the University of Pennsylvania, our IT security considerations for our procurement or service and product purchasing process takes the form of a questionnaire of suppliers. So that's on the web, you can review that. If you want advice from a third party for figuring out what your security vetting should be for considering potential tools and suppliers, the best known framework in the USA is a very comprehensive one from Educause, HECVAT, or Higher Education Community Vendor Assessment Toolkit. Here's a simpler alternative. IMS Global recently made public their app vetting rubric, where the security questions are more focused around the practicalities of web applications and teaching tools, things like encryption and authentication, rather than what I call here IT comprehensiveness. That was a bit glib, but an exhaustive security set of security questions. This rubric also emphasizes data collection, data sharing, and even advertising, which some of these free EdTech tools have advertising or may add advertising down the road. And these are also privacy concerns. For confirming the fit of the tool that you're assessing at your institution, you'll want to start conversations with people involved in governance, and sometimes they have interesting perspectives that they bring in. I will just point to one sentence on our provost's office, which is the boss of the faculty, settling on a guideline during the pandemic, no remote exam proctoring. That shifted my plans and trying to improve that as a technical capability.
All right, Rob, I'm stopping again for a minute. I think that we can now show the poll results. Just yeah, that would be a good timing, and maybe.
All right, I'll stop the sharing for a bit to make that easy, unless they pop up. Oh, okay, they do pop up. I'll go back to sharing.
So Anat, maybe you want to walk through the results here. Maybe you have some comments on that.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you, Rob. At this point, we'll continue in a second, but thank you so much for these insightful, enlightening advice that you're sharing with us. So thank you so much. Let's have a look together at the audience preferences or choices on the poll. So the first thing that we're looking at is where do you typically look for EdTech tools? And we can see that the majority is looking at colleagues' recommendations. And I think that is probably true both for instructors and for EdTech experts and IT.
I absolutely agree. Now more than ever, these conversations are crucial, and really create the context for considering what to acquire and how to pilot it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of get the sense, even when I was listening to you showing the different sources that you can revert to when you're looking for new tools, at the end of the day, it is word of mouth and the way that we speak to each other. The instructor, as you described, Gadalon, for example, and Can Moon approaching and kind of saying, here's this thing that we have tested and we are looking into, and can you help us with that? So that's really...
Can you help us make it more frictionless? The concern that one of the attendees had about login, that was really the form of their question to me. How do we simplify this?
Yeah, and I think in that regard, I should mention that Ment.io is integrated into all the different LMSs and also into Microsoft Teams. And so it's not just the single sign-on, it is when it's integrated into the LMS with the help of the IT, then there is no sign-on to the additional tool, to Ment.io. And so it's interesting how when you're starting a conversation, as you suggested, this is when and where we're learning about new tools. I'm looking at the second question now. Are you happy with the tools that are being used today in your organization? And I'm happy to see that most folks are saying somewhat yes, which means that it's decent enough. It sounds to me, it might be an interpretation, right? That it's decent enough that you could teach and you could work, but it's not a full kind of, yes, I'm all sorted out with the tools that I need for my teaching. And I'll assume here that all of us have felt the difference between the first semester teaching remote and with COVID and all the confusion around it to what came afterwards, where we've learned about new tools and have been able to adopt them. So this is also really interesting.
Yeah, Anat, on that aspect, I'd like to suggest that you jump to the fourth question, because I think it highlights maybe the part where there is a missing element in the existing software, and this is where the biggest pain is reflected by 75% of the audience.
Right. So the question, as you can see, is what are the biggest learning challenges that you are looking to solve? And we're seeing how between these choices, student engagement is the most burning issue, I guess, that most instructors and IT managers and designers are worried about, just because we have to have the students on board and as engaged as possible. And I can see that there's also, with the third question, what is the greatest challenge when starting a new EdTech? It's the issue of, do I know how to properly onboard the tool? And I think this is where tools with easy interface and user experience, that helps a lot in what to do. So this is really enlightening and interesting. Rob, would you like to comment on that or continue with this in mind?
Uh,
Thank you.
I'm
I'll just
really
say thank you everyone for participating in the poll. I neglected to say that, and that's really, really important.
This was a great response rate. Thank you. And I am pleasantly surprised with the staff onboarding identified as the top challenge. There's I don't really go into depth on that and what I have remaining to say, but I can share that a single knowledge base for teaching was something that we had done at Wharton Computing. I don't know if I said before that the part of the Wharton School that I'm in is the IT organization, Wharton Computing. I think Anat said that. And that we were lucky to have completed that project before COVID and absolutely are benefiting for it now. Looking sometimes at the viewing statistics of certain articles, it blows my mind that the ones about Zoom and all things synchronous and remote instruction are getting the same page view counts in 6 months that other articles that we've had around for a year or more. I'm gonna shall I go back to quickly go through my slides and then we'll open this up.
Maybe if that works, just because we are limited with time, and I'm already seeing that some of the questions that were gathered for you will probably also review the things that you had planned on the slides. So I want to start shooting questions your way if that's okay. So
that sounds good.
Yeah. So one of the things that come from the members here in the discussion, some questions about how you specifically at Wharton deal with the concept of students with learning disorders, the ability to keep all EdTech tools aligned with accessibility, differentiated instructions, all best practices around that. Can you comment and maybe share your view about that shortly?
Certainly. What I want to do is to actually open the web page that is linked in my presentation. That is taking me more time than I thought. Here we go. So can everybody see the sort of circular diagram?
Yep.
So while I emphasized in what I was saying before that the WCAG covers a lot in that tech space because so many tools are web applications, that's by no means the only dimension. So this particular diagram was written to sort of frame all of the accessibility specifications that IMS gathers together or recommends. But I like the diagram because it shows off all the different layers, the legal aspects of it, which is different depending on your country, sometimes your state or province. Assistive technologies, which can be helpers that are either built into a student's operating system on their device or added on, and design choices are absolutely a way of supporting accessibility. There's a philosophy that is worth a quick search, Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, that I wish I had a really fully proficient practitioner on my team, but it's certainly something that we monitor. There are some universities out there that really focus on that. University of Central Florida comes to mind. So I hope that, well, not a comprehensive answer. I hope that begins to plant some seeds for how you might research, some of these different layers.
Yes.
And this is a link from my slides.
Certainly.
On the accessibility point.
Maybe a question now that it's like meant to both of you. Rob, and Anat. So people are really asking here in the audience about the challenges of remote learning and the shift that has now occurred. And you do see student engagement being a challenge, and you do want to be ready for this new environment. So what are your best tips and practices on keeping engagement in a remote learning environment?
How I was planning to address that was around mapping the tools that you have or add to your ecosystem to different parts of the learning process. For Menti.io, that is intended to serve as a tool facilitating a learning activity. Other tools may be more around assessment, for example, a specialized exam, test, or quiz engine. Still more may be around analytics, where it's less about what individual learners do with the analytics tool and more about how the analytics is measuring their interactions with the LMS or VLE and with some of the newer strategies out there, such as Caliper Analytics and LTI Insights, the journey of the learner as they start out in a learning platform, launch a tool, come back to the platform, progress through course content. Anat, is there something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. I think you're absolutely right that the key here is the fact that it's a process, and the fact that we should be asking ourselves, how do we engage our students in a way that is part of the learning process and not a nice to have, occasional add-on. It needs to be something that truly encourages them on an ongoing basis to take part in studying. And I think it's really important to emphasize that this is true both for adult learners in universities and also young pupils or students in the K-12, because we're seeing this engagement issue. And truth has to be said that engagement was an issue even before COVID. It was also an issue when it was a face-to-face class, but it's turning into a much more severe, I'd say, challenge now that we're teaching remote, or lucky ones who are teaching, or I'm not sure if it's lucky or not, ones that are teaching hybrid, right? And so to me, I think the way that I choose my technologies is there is the nice to have and there is the integral part of the learning. And when you are focusing on tools that are the integral part of the learning that students are familiar with and they feel that it's designed for them, it encourages them to take part. It encourages them to engage in the learning process, and then it's a completely different story. And I'll just touch upon the fact very briefly that one of the qualities of the platform of Menti.io is the fact that it feels, I don't want to say gamified too much, but there are gamified elements such as different stars and crowns and scores for the answers that are based on actual important elements of teaching. But the actual experience is one that encourages engagement, including the fact that they're receiving feedback, instant feedback from peers and feedback from the platform itself. And I'll just finish with that, just saying my students use Menti.io between classes. So I finish a class by deciding with them what are the 2-3 questions that I'm going to post for the entire week until our next session. And then they just carry on the learning into this conversation that they have during the week. And when I meet them again next week, I refer to their answers and we talk about them and I acknowledge what they had done. Sometimes I even participated in discussions myself, not just overview them, just to stress the point of this is an integral part of teaching. So I think that helps a lot with engagement, again, from the instructor side.
Yeah. Great point, Anna. Just to mention that you're also getting great endorsement from the crowd here. So thanks, Jessica and Gary and Mario for endorsing that as well. If you don't mind, I want to turn to a question coming from Min Chen, who we know very well, and happy to have you here, Min. The question here is very interesting, and I want you to pay attention to that. Basically, Min is asking, how do you overcome the trust and discrimination issue for the students, like, and the ability to establish a healthy and supporting learning community? I think it's a really serious topic. So, any comments here from Rob and Anat would be very interesting here.
So in the learning activity space, this particular product category that we're talking about today with Mint, the discussion add-ons, is somewhat proven to help with trust and community building in the sense that a student who might not be as comfortable speaking up in class, participating verbally, which today could be, over Zoom and not face to face, may be the most valuable and effective in an online discussion, may come out of the shell. And what's compelling about Mint.io's solution in this category is that the score provides some metrics that can help highlight who is coming out of their shell, who is networking with other students through what they say and how they respond. And that's data that wasn't easy to find prior to this educational application of the very sound data science techniques and AI behind the product. So I'm sort of the opposite of a Luddite, but I will always believe that it is possible for technology to help with connection and to aid the learner.
Thank you, Rob. Now, excuse me for rushing it a bit. There's 6 more minutes, and I do want to be respectful of people's time and to finish on time. So maybe to take 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap up. Lisa Dobson here in the crowd raised something very interesting, I think, that you all need to listen to. Basically saying that the entire engagement is really dependent on the feedback between students and facilitators to be an ongoing process, right? And I think it touches the very point that the learning process has changed. The remote learning has changed, and Zoom, to the extent, is not really a learning platform, right? And just the fact that you are all on the same call does not mean that you really have deeper engagement and deeper discussion. And I think this is one of the challenges that Mint.io is here to address, the need to have constant feedback between students and instructor as part of the learning process. And I really wanted just to raise that point. Anat, if there's anything you want to add specifically about student and instructor feedback as a learning technique to really cater for that, I think that would be interesting to the audience.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to relate to what Rob was answering, the previous question and this new question that you just mentioned. I think that there's 2 points that I want to make very, very briefly. One is the fact that, as Rob mentioned, what Mint.io enables me is to see my students, to truly view who is doing what in a very kind of secured and comfortable environment. I have this activity log for each discussion, and I can see how students are, who feels more comfortable to write answers and who's only upvoting, downvoting, and I can understand and kind of feel the pulse of my class, and I can communicate that to my students and encourage them to step out of their comfort zone every once in a while. Today, I had a conversation with my students. One of them said, I'm still kind of testing the water on the platform. It's a new group, right? And I said, that's perfectly fine. And I would suggest that if you're just starting off, just use the, if there's a whole range of responses that you can have on the platform, from answering full answers to replying, all the way to upvoting and marking as insightful. I said, well, may I just suggest that you start by marking the insightful ones and reading some of the comments, because that's also part of collaboration. And so I think the main point is to say, if I have the right information in order to manage my relationship with my students and their relationship to what I'm teaching and to the entire class, then that is a tremendous help to the learning process. So in a very brief, concise manner. I hope that helps. I was trying to be very, very short.
So just knowing that we have so many more questions, but 3 minutes left, I would like to encourage all of you to continue this discussion even after the webinar. I'm going to write you all our address, which is webinars@ment.io. It's here written on chat. You can send more questions our way, and obviously we will also share them with Rob. So please keep this going. I know there's a discussion going on in the chat now about mobile phone-based learning platforms, about cyberbullying, about accessibility, about single sign-on. So there's more to talk, and we are here for you. And on my behalf, it's an opportunity to thank you for spending this hour with us. I hope it was efficient and beneficial to you, but please keep the discussion going. Any comment from Rob and from Anat before we finish?
Rob, would you like to maybe a final remark or a farewell message before I thank you and the audience?
Sure. As I had mentioned earlier, I have some more resources on my slides. We didn't get to because I was a little too verbose on the early ones. I didn't get to talk through my points on privacy and on structuring a pilot, but I believe we can make those slides available. There's a few more links and recommendations on those topics in there. I feel very lucky to have the opportunity to do the kind of work that I do, and especially count my blessings in 2020 that just by chance I happen to be doing something that facilitates the sort of intersection of technology and learning in a way that's needed more than ever in this new normal. And I want to thank Ment.io for making this call together. Thank Anat for her very much appreciated perspective as an instructor. And these questions and comments that I've been seeing in the chat have been very reassuring and inspiring. All of you who came today, in my opinion, care about the right things and are asking the right questions. And I encourage you to start those conversations where you are, challenge people like me at your institution, challenge your suppliers, insist on more standard support, and look at all of the different dimensions, whether it's IT security, privacy, accessibility, or contribution to components of learning, such as learning activities or assessment or analytics, that can make for the best and strongest experience for all of your audiences, for faculty, for students, and staff. It's been my genuine pleasure to meet all of you online today, and thank you so much for your interest. And I'm just blown away by this.
And thank you so much. So I'll just join Rob with thanking all of you for joining us and for asking all these interesting and important questions. And I want to wholeheartedly thank you, Rob, for your thorough and flexible presentation and incredible tips and suggestions on how to do this properly. And thank you so much for the work that you do and for what you have shared with us today. And thank you all of you joining us today. And we look forward to staying in touch and continuing this interesting conversation. I hope you all stay safe and take care and continue having these interesting conversations. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you again.
Thank you.